Hi everyone, and welcome to Unit 2. With this unit, I not only want to introduce what we'll be talking about in terms of the history that we'll be focusing on, but I also want to give you a quick rundown of how these learning modules will work, because from Unit 2 moving forward, they'll all essentially be the same in terms of their structure. So I'm sharing my screen here with you. You can see that we're here in Unit 2. What we're going to do is just kind of go through the elements of each learning module so that you understand what's here and what you'll need to complete each time. The reason I'm doing this is because you have a couple of options in terms of what you can do for each learning module. So when you click on whatever learning module you're going into, you'll see an introduction to the topic. Welcome to Unit 2, the date, and then the topics that we'll be working on. The next thing you'll see is this section. In order to complete this unit's coursework, you will. And then in blue, I have stuff for the first day, and then what you'll need to do for the second day. Below that are the objectives and the points possible. So you'll see that here, the first section under the first day, you'll complete the readings, you'll view the film clips. And in this case, you'll post one discussion question. The discussion questions are always due on the first day. During the units that we have a discussion. If it's a blog, your first step of the blog won't be due until the second day at noon. So just keep that in mind. You'll always have, the first day you'll always have to complete readings, and you'll always have to complete at least some reading tweets or multiple choice questions. So those are both outlined in the syllabus in their respective tabs on the left-hand side of the page. And those are there just so you can kind of have some options. You can decide whether you want to complete the work on Twitter as described, or if you don't want to do that, you can do some multiple choice questions. If you want to do a little of both, that's fine too. Remember though that you always have to complete the discussions or the blogs. Those are never optional, always mandatory. You have to work on those in order to pass the class. During the second day then, for Unit 2, you will submit your 2 responses to your peers' questions. So you'll select 2 of the questions that your peers have asked, and you will write specific responses to those. They don't have to be hugely detailed, but they do have to include at least 2 specific cited references to the readings or the films. So something we're working on, something we're working on with the discussions is using evidence from the materials to support your ideas and provide evidence for your, or I should say provide examples of your ideas. Once you've responded to your peers' questions, you'll either need to complete a journal entry, or you can complete the 4 glossary entries for the e-text. You can also do a combination of those. You can do the journal and a couple of glossary entries if you want. So what I'm getting at here is you can acquire extra credit, but as noted in the syllabus, you can't just stop working if you get a bunch of extra credit at the beginning of the term. So you'll always have to keep doing the discussions and the blogs. If I'm going to scroll back up here, when I embed this video that you're watching now, you'll see it here, so hopefully you will have found it already. I'm going to scroll up here and just show you this table of contents. Also, when you click this button, you'll go to the next one, which is the Unit 2 readings. But if ever you want to jump ahead to something else or go back to something you already looked at, just use this table of contents. So for example, if you've already looked at this intro and you've already done some of the readings, you want to submit your discussion question, you can just click here on discussion 1, and it will take you to this part of the module page. Now it looks like you'll have to actually click this link here to go to the discussion. I won't do that now because you can do that on your own when you get to that point. So hopefully this will help in terms of understanding how to move through the learning modules. And I'm going to move now. I'm going to end the screencast and instead just give you a look at me and a discussion of some of the content that we're going to be covering in Unit 2. All right, in terms of content in Unit 2, we'll be looking at the histories of the first peoples to inhabit New Mexico. So primarily, we'll really start focusing on the ancestral Puebloan people, formerly known as the Anasazis, and the Mogollon people who lived in
essentially the Boot Hill area of New Mexico and in northern Mexico. We'll look at the kinds of lifestyles that they established, and we'll also think about how we know what we know about them. And that's really a key part of not just this element of New Mexico history, but all of New Mexico history or any history that you study. Something to always keep in mind is how do we know what we know about this thing, or about these people, or about this event. You'll want to look for the kinds of sources that authors use. So in the ebook that I wrote, there are some footnotes. Just in terms of a stylistic decision, I only added footnotes for direct quotes. But at the end of each chapter, you will find the notes and the resources for further reading. Those will help you understand some of the sources that were used to tell that story. Also, we'll be thinking about oral histories and how Native peoples continue to tell their own stories, but they do so in a way that combines the past and the present. Something that helps them to make their cultures more powerful and more present and more resilient to them. So, although many of us from the kind of Western academic tradition, we distinguish very sharply between the past, the present, the future. A lot of indigenous peoples or peoples just of different cultural traditions don't necessarily do that. And so that's something to understand and think about on its own terms. So I really want you to pay attention to the videos, the readings, so that we can think about Native lifeways on their own terms, not putting value judgments on them as the Spaniards did when they first arrived in the 1530s, the late 1530s. Of course, when we read sources coming from Spanish chroniclers, we have to take them with a grain of salt because those people kind of automatically considered Pueblo lifeways to be inferior to their own. They thought Pueblo beliefs were inferior to Christian beliefs. They thought Pueblo ways of building homes, even though they were impressed that Pueblos built homes and that they lived sedentary lifestyles, the ways that they did it to the Spaniards were somewhat primitive or not up to par from the Spanish perspective. And so we get very heavily value-laden judgments of Pueblo people from those Spanish sources. The problem that we face is that as historians, we have to use the sources that are available. There's no other way to tell the story of the first peoples and of the contact without using those very problematic sources, the Spanish sources. So something to think about then as well is how can we still use these very biased sources? What can we tell from them? How can we sort of remove that bias, or at least just critically think about the bias and how it would have shaped the story that's being told? If we're able to do that, then we can add different layers of the story, new pieces of the puzzle into the mix and tell a much fuller history. So that's something that a lot of historians attempt to do, something to keep in mind as you read through this particular unit. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh, thinking about the earliest attempts at Spanish conquest and colonization. That's what we're going to get to in this unit. We're going to look at the reconquest in the Iberian Peninsula. We're going to look at the conquest of Mexico by Hernán Cortés. And so we got to think about what kinds of patterns were established during those historical moments that were then applied, at least in some form, to the conquest of New Mexico as well. So that's the reason that I give you this kind of long context on Spanish patterns of colonization and conquest. So that's what you should keep in mind with that part. And then finally, as we move forward throughout the rest of this course over the next 2 weeks, think about how we know what we know about any given topic. It's a lot easier, I think, to keep those questions present when we're studying First Peoples and the early contact because they're so far removed and because there are so few sources available. However, we have to ask the same questions all the time. We should ask the same questions of current events, of things we see in the news, whichever news outlet we use, whether through the internet or a cable news channel or just local TV or the newspapers, whatever it is. We have to ask, how did this person who is writing this or telling the story come about this information? How is it being processed? And most importantly, how is it being interpreted? Although we would like to think so, facts, information does not speak for itself. People interpret it. They have to. So we have to think about how is it being interpreted, and is it being interpreted in the right way? Could we use another framework? Could we look at it from another angle? All of these things will help us to tell a fuller story, capture a bigger history of what's going on in New Mexico, for our case in this class, over the long course of, from as early as we can get to as close as we can get to the present. So I hope that you enjoy Unit 2.